precious little dragons, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome for the first time. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy and finding ways to keep yourselves busy and entertained and less stressed during this very, very weird time. Today I am going to be reviewing the book The Other Einstein by Marie Benedict. So this book is interesting, and it's a little different than other historical fictions that I have reviewed in the past, or even that I have read in the past. And so I'm not sure what the technical title for this subgenre is, but if it was a movie it'd be a biopic, so maybe it's like a biofic? I don't know, as I'm sure you can tell by the title. It follows an actual real life person. While it's not technically a biography, it does have fictionalized aspects of it, and it kind of fictionalizes their life. It does follow a historical timeline, and it's in essence kind of a biography, but not really. You know? It's hard to describe. So I tend to feel a little weird about this particular genre, particularly when it's about someone that's more recent. I mean, if I'm going to read a biofic about Queen Elizabeth I, or about someone in ancient Rome like Caesar or something like that, that feels a little bit more separated because there's so much time, and your historical documents, there's gaps that could kind of need to be filled in and really have no way of knowing, and it feels like enough time has passed that it doesn't feel odd to write a biofic about that person, which I know if you're doing a movie or something, I mean, they do movies about people that are alive and more recent all the time. But in books it just feels a little different because it really dives into the person and their thoughts and their actions, and it feels a lot more intimate than a movie does, at least to me. So I was a little hesitant going into this book. It's actually about Albert Einstein's first wife, Mileva Marić. Marić? Ooh, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I'm just gonna call her Mileva, or her nickname Mitza. It follows her, and she's really, really fascinating. She's actually also a physicist. They met at the Polytechnic Institute in Zurich, Switzerland. So just following their story was really interesting, and obviously, as I said, Albert Einstein's first wife, so the story has a bittersweet ending. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently for this book. Look, I'm actually not going to give you guys any kind of spoiler warning because it's history, so that feels weird. I'll still probably link a timestamp down below for the end, but I mean, there's no spoilers because it's history, so stick around. Alright, let's get started. So as I said for my summary, the story follows Mileva, and she's Albert Einstein's first wife. So it begins when she starts at the Polytechnic Institute and follows the development and ultimate downfall of her relationship with Albert. I feel like we kind of have this idolized view of Albert Einstein because, I mean, he's Einstein, he's genius, and outside of science, outside of physics and general relativity and all of these scientific accomplishments, we don't really see the man at all. We don't really understand a lot of his personal life at all. At least I did. And so this book, while it focuses on his relationship with Mitza, so it's not just about him. It's also about highlighting this really strong, brilliant woman that was in the shadows of Albert's success and unfolding her history. But it also has the double aspect of humanizing Albert as well. So, I mean, like I said, she's a brilliant physicist in her own right, and the two bond over their love of science. That is their love language throughout the entire story. So this is going to mostly consist of character notes because plot is just history. I mean, there's not a lot I can really say about plot other than it follows the established guidelines that history gave the author. I do have a slight content warning, so instead of a spoiler warning, here's your content warning. That was way too happy for that. But yes, this book does deal a little bit with domestic abuse. It's mostly towards the end of the story that this comes up. So if that is a difficult topic for you, this may not be the book for you. And again, this is founded in history, so it is what it is. I think the book deals with it fairly thoughtfully. It's not really graphic. It does tend to lean more on the emotional abuse side, so obviously that in and of itself can be very triggering, but there's not really graphic physical abuse. But other than that, we can really start to dig in. Note on makeup. So this book does cover a decent span of time. I would say the vast majority of the book kind of takes place in the late Victorian, early Edwardian era, and as far as makeup goes, that doesn't give me a lot to work with because makeup was not really looked well upon, and Mileva definitely would not be the person to particularly care about her appearance for most of the book. The makeup look itself, while there is going to be very, very minimal historical inspiration, it is going to be more book and concept inspired, which meant math and physics, which is not my thing, and I took forever to film this video because I had no clue what to do for my makeup look. So I'm still slightly winging it. I have like an idea in my head, but it's kind of abstract. So we'll see what happens. So as far as, you know, like the Edwardian Victorian beauty standards, I mean, pale, which, I mean, obviously slightly problematic, a little bit colorist, a lot bit colorist. So whenever I do historical makeup looks and the beauty standard is pale, first of all, leaves almost no room for creativity for me because, but also I want to not be problematic. So I am just going to replace the word with bright because that is something that I can, you know, I can do. Brighten up the complexion, brighten up the face, slightly less colorist, bonus. And also they did rouge their cheeks a little bit just to give kind of that youthful, healthy glow, and occasionally would add just like a tint to the lips. That's about the max of the historical inspiration for this look. Let's get into this. Ooh, ooh. Maybe if I don't drop everything. I don't know what that face was, don't ask. So, character notes. I, again, had some reservations about kind of the whole biofic genre because I was just, you know, I'm just worried about how it's portrayed, and a lot of it depends on how much research and effort into realism is the author going to put into this, how much are they going to exaggerate for dramatic effect, how much are they going to just kind of take things in their own direction. It made me a little nervous, and honestly, yes, it's over 100 years ago, but it still seems very recent to me, and so it just felt like a little iffy going into it. But I was fascinated enough about learning about Mileva that I went into it because I knew literally nothing about her. I barely even knew that Albert Einstein was married, so I mean, we'll get into that. I mean, he's a genius, but his love life is a little messy. But I really love Mileva. I mean, she is not only brilliant, but she faced barriers going into her life that blow my mind away. I mean, it's hard to really picture what she went through because, I mean, even though it's not that long ago, and we do obviously women in science still face barriers, but we've made so many leaps and bounds in comparison to what she had to go through in this book. And not only that, but she wasn't just facing sex standards trying to go into physics and science, but she also was Eastern European trying to study in Western Europe and faced some xenophobia there because of, you know, just where she was from. She wasn't Aryan, so she was less than perfect. And so she was dealing with that, and then in addition to that, she also had a disability. She had a genetic hip defect, so she walked with a limp. And while obviously that did nothing to harm her intellect or her personality, but because of that, she was looked down upon, and it made it all the harder for her to succeed. And actually, that disability was one of the reasons why she went to science in the first place, because in Eastern Europe, where she was from, that was enough to make her basically unmarriageable. And so her father really pushed her towards education and science. He saw that as her way out, her way to kind of succeed in life. And so she developed this love of science and physics, and that was not only an escape for her, but that was also, it was very connected to her spirituality, which I thought was really cool and interesting. That was how she saw God and sought after God. She saw God within science, which, I mean, personally, I thought was really, really cool. I found her approach to that really, really fascinating because it was how she found God's divinity in the patterns of science, and that was how she felt connected and close to God rather than just prayer. And it reminded me a lot of, I took a psychology and Christianity class when I was in school, and we talked a lot about that, about how science and religion don't have to be opposite. It can be an aspect of worship to practice science, to practice your field. He created it, so why wouldn't it be good? We talked a lot about that and talked a lot about how you can find God's fingerprints in the patterns he creates in the universe, in the body, in nature, in space and general relativity. It was a really cool connection for me, having come from that perspective, because I feel like a lot of people do kind of view science and religion as completely separate, mutually exclusive opposites. And so having a character who was wholly invested in their inclusion, that was how she existed, was in this cohesive way. I appreciated that a lot about her character. Mileva does have a very close relationship with her father. She calls him Papa. Throughout the book, he's kind of her driving force. He's the one that pushed her towards science, that made sure she got an education, which I really appreciated. They introduce Albert right off the bat. She calls him just Mr. Einstein in the beginning, and he is the only classmate that is kind to her and really seems to value her opinion as a scientist, which is really cool. And they're just friends in the beginning. It's very, very cute. One of my notes was, okay, is it weird to absolutely adore / have a mild book crush on Albert Einstein? Because like it was very cute because their friendship was very adorable. They talked in the language of science. They played violin and piano together. At the beginning of the book, it's just very cute. They have a nice little friendship. Mileva does have this disconnect between career and romance. Basically, in that day and age, and I mean even today, it's difficult to balance the two for a lot of women, but in her day, that was basically unheard of. If you were married, you were expected to stay at home. Having a career was out of the option. So she was very, very hesitant to have any type of relationship with Albert, in addition to the fact that she had been raised to think that she was unmarriageable just because of her disability. Albert's like, no, we'll be the perfect bohemian couple. We'll pursue science together. We'll spur each other forward. It'll be amazing. We'll publish work together. It'll be great. A lot of the first part of that book is you seeing her struggle with that because she's not sure. She doesn't know how it'll work out. And I felt like she was extremely relatable. Like, even though, like I said, I mean, people do still deal with those struggles today, but probably not to the same extremes. But even in that less relatable situation to modern day, the character was still extremely relatable. I felt all of her emotions and her struggle and her feelings so strongly, which is, I mean, partially why you do see Albert and their friendship through these kind of love goggles. It's, you know, it's very cute. It's adorable. You're like, oh my goodness, perfect science couple goals. And, you know, it's just very, you love their cerebral nerdiness. And it's just cute. You see her be this amazing woman in academia. You see her succeed. You see her eventually start to make friends that she's, you know, never had the opportunity to make before, and she becomes very close friends with a girl named Helene, and who again is struggling with a lot of the same career versus romance things, and they actually make a pact that they're not going to get married and they're basically going to pursue their academia together. So they make this pact and then they eventually both break it. Helene actually breaks it first. And at the beginning, you know, Albert is very gentlemanly. When she says she wants to pursue her academics, she's just not sure about the relationship between the two of them. He's like, okay, I'll wait. It's totally up to you. That's fine. And I was just like, oh. And then like when they finally do kiss, he asks for consent. I'm like, yes, good genius boy. And again, they science together. They help each other out, and she's actually better at math than he is. Like, he's better at the theoretical side and she's better at like the practical side, so it's kind of cool to see them help each other out and work together. And at the beginning of the book, you're just wholly here for it. You want them to be together. It's awesome. He doesn't change from Mr. Einstein to Albert until they're officially together, and I thought that switch was really good. You see the switch from Mileva's perspective, so once it's less formal and it's more intimate, you as the audience get that switch, which I just really liked that. I mean, it wasn't like subtle or anything. You're just like one chapter is Mr. Einstein, the next chapter he's Albert, and you're like, okay, cool. A lot of the struggles between them come from a couple things. So one is that Albert's parents hate Mileva a lot. And part of it is because she's not Jewish, she's Christian. And, you know, Albert, he's not particularly religious, so he doesn't really care about it, but his parents just do not like her. And then also Albert's pride gets in the way a lot, so he skipped a lot of classes. Like, he wasn't the most dedicated of students. Like, he almost just, like, dropped out, and Mileva had to cover for him a lot with professors, and it was interesting, but he was just like, well, they're not modern enough, and they're not considering any of my theories, so I'd rather just do independent study than go to class. And she's like, hey, you need to stay in their good graces so you can get a job. Like, I could see why the professors weren't the biggest fan of Albert, to be frank. And then once they've graduated, a lot of struggles just come from his pride. He can't find a job, which is partially, it's due to this combination of, like, anti-Semitism, which was definitely on the rise in that era, and then also just, again, he did not try to get himself in good graces with his professors at all. Yeah. That all gets in the way, and like Mileva had a job offer kind of right away, and you know, she's just kind of waiting on, okay, well, when are we gonna get married so we can, you know, have this perfect bohemian relationship you've been talking about forever. And you know, she's kind of struggling with a lot of this stuff. And so the turning point happens when they take a trip together to Lake Como, and they end up having sex for the first time, and that's their kind of retreat. And then after they get back, Mileva finds out she's pregnant, and that kind of throws a wrench in everything. Like he seems okay with it, but doesn't quite understand the gravity of it and how that affects Mileva. Because she's pregnant and she has like really bad morning sickness, she doesn't do really well at her oral dissertation defense, and she ends up failing, which it's never quite made clear if it's just because of like her not doing well enough, or if it's like a mix of sexism. Probably aspects of both. Even though they admitted her into the program, she had to work, you know, twice as hard to prove herself, and she wasn't at her best. It wasn't great, and her parents are very upset, you know, that she's kind of thrown all of this away, and she's, you know, hiding out in kind of their summer home. And it eventually gets better. They forgive her, but they don't forgive Albert. They still haven't met him yet, and they just kind of blame him for ruining her chances at a career. He seems kind of weirdly nonchalant about the whole thing. And then when Liesel, their daughter, finally is born, he doesn't come to visit. And like Mietza's understandably pretty mad at him for he keeps kind of promising marriage and then not delivering on it, and it's this really weird, awkward situation. It's really weird because you love him so much at the beginning of the book, but then you're starting to see him change at this point. He seemed to be changing and more callous and not really caring about anything beyond his own ideals. You feel Mietza's sadness and bitterness, especially how he doesn't really seem to care about his own daughter, and that's, I mean, it's weird to kind of see him change from Mietza's perspective, because she's still trying to hold on to this image that she had of him in their early relationship, and trying to cling to that and kind of get the magic back, but it's not really happening, and it's rough. It's rough. Once they do finally get married, she ends up leaving Liesel with her parents under the promise that once they're married, they'll be able to eventually bring Liesel with them. She's going back to him with that promise in mind. Things seem better for a while, and they start to work on science stuff together. She gets a note that Liesel is sick with scarlet fever, and so she, against Albert's wishes, rushes back to her daughter, obviously, and Liesel ends up dying, and it's obviously extremely rough. And I think you see that struggle with her really, really strongly and profoundly, and she actually is the one that she makes this connection on the train station back about general relativity. She looks at the clock and she looks at the train, and all of a sudden it's like physics has opened. It's her grief-driven philosophy, like, why did God only allow me to see his handiwork after so much suffering? And she has like a moment of choice there. And I'm gonna read this quote because I think it was a very, very specific turning point in the book. It says, "I could cling to my fury at the unfairness of Liesel's death and my anger at Albert for his incomprehension and selfishness, or I could surrender my wrath and instead embrace hope for a new family life with this baby." That she was also pregnant at the time. The sort of life I'd wished for Liesel, and she chose life. She chose this life, and she chose to try and reconnect with Albert through science. Love followed in science's footsteps with Albert, and so they reconnect, they're writing these papers, and she views the general relativity paper as like like kind of her ode to Lee Searle. That's how she can honor Lee Searle's life that literally almost no one knew about. And she's still just privately mourning and grieving her daughter. And then Albert leaves her name out of the relativity paper, which I was so mad. And she was like, I could deal with being left out of these other papers, but like the general relativity paper that was hers. That was her ode to Lee Searle, and that he left it out without like consulting her, just like, it was rough. And then he did it again with a patent, like publicly, and so it shifts. Like, he's kind of gaining all this fame and notoriety, and he kind of just like wants her to be like good housewife. And so like all of these bohemian ideals that had been, you know, talked about when they were like still dating just kind of go in the out the window. And it's really hard. It was really hard to read because it's just like you're kind of left reeling with her, like, what the heck happened? You know, what happened? What happened to the Albert we knew? What happened? Yeah, and then so they shift places back and forth just depending on where Albert's career is taking him, and then he asks an old classmate to collaborate with him on the relativity paper in front of Mita, which is just like nail in the coffin, and you just see this getting rougher and rougher and rougher. And so one thing about like the sectioning of the book, it's sectioned into 3 parts, and each of the 3 parts are named after Newton's laws of motion, and the parts do seem to kind of follow that well. And then he finds out that he had an affair with his cousin Elsa, which ended up being his second wife later on, which, yeah, that's a thing that happened. So that was not great, and he swears up and down that it's over, and things get even worse. And then at one point he slaps her, and this is when things are starting to fall apart, and we enter the 3rd part. You see her very much losing herself, like loss of her own identity and her own self is very much part of this book. It's repeated throughout. At the beginning it's like, I am lost, like she's lost, she's in love, it's great, it's wonderful, and then it transitions into I'm lost, I've lost myself, I've lost my sight, I've lost my sense of purpose in life. Her goals and dreams, they've all kind of fallen apart, and you know, Helene has moved away and she's also given up this part of herself, and things have been rough for her, and you just see this kind of gradual falling apart, and she's breaking, and it's really hard to read, and just this emotional manipulation that comes from like Albert, and it's rough. And they end up meeting Marie Curie because he kind of offers that as like a gift to kind of placate her, because he knows how much she adores Marie Curie. So they meet Marie Curie, and that's kind of like, she holds Marie Curie obviously to this super like glowing idolization, because she and her husband like worked side by side, kind of like what she had hoped she and Albert would be at the beginning. But you know, Marie Curie also got her own spotlight, which was really cool. And so she has this conversation that's kind of eye-opening with Madame Curie that kind of helps her see where things are going wrong, and she's very perceptive to like situation, but then at the same time kind of notes that Albert stepped in for her, and it's like, okay, weird morals there, bud, because he supported Marie Curie when the Nobel Prize Committee is like not wanting to support her, and he's like, she's awesome, but he like puts down his own wife, and it's weird. You see this change in him. He's very callous, very cold, doesn't care for her really. It's just like he almost wants her to leave, but not in so many words. Like, he's not gonna say it, but he's like everything about his actions is saying, I don't love you. He's cold, he's cut off, and then he blames everything on her. It's very much gaslighting, very much gaslighting. So much. Yeah, and it's, you see her kind of breaking down, and that conversation with Madame Curie kind of helps her to see where things have gone wrong. And then it ends with this list. So Albert comes in with this list, and this is historically accurate, stupidly. He comes in with this list of like demands, like, if you want to stay with me, you're gonna follow all these demands. And it's like, hold on, let me see if I can like I mean, if you want to get mad. Oof.
Okay, so I couldn't find it during that Google search, but here is the list that I did finally find. This is obviously not the original, it's transcribed into English. Just a couple little small highlights. Section A is mostly household stuff. You'll be perfect little housewife. Section B is basically, I don't want to be seen with you unless it's absolutely necessary. Don't expect it. Section C is basically, don't look at me, don't talk to me, don't be in the same space as me, don't talk bad about me in front of our children, la-di-da-di-da. Just reading this list makes me mad. It's so stupid. You can pause and read the whole thing if you feel like it. Alright, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
And she's like, no, we're done. And they get a divorce and they leave, and that's pretty much where the book ends. And the very last thing you get is you get a letter, basically, from her, written much later in her life, talking about, you know, connecting her life to Newton's 3 laws, which was just this really beautiful way to tie up the book, I thought. I loved Mitza's character. I loved seeing everything through her eyes, even the parts that were very difficult. You saw her go from this, like, idealistic, hopeful academic to wife. You saw her go through the heartache of losing a child. You saw her losing herself and eventually having to find her own strength and courage before she leaves, and having to come to this realization that Albert's not the same person that she fell in love with when they were students. And it's heartbreaking, but at the same time it feels very, very real and genuine. And I mean, I laughed, I cried, I thought it was just really, really, really well done. Knowing that it's real, or based on real things, it made it all the more genuine to me. And I really appreciated that. Yeah, I thought it was beautifully written. I really appreciate the author's writing style. I thought there are moments, of course, that are speculation, so we don't actually know what happened to Lisa. It's speculated that she was either given up for adoption or that she died of scarlet fever, but that was something that the author kind of had to make speculation on. There is speculation about how much collaboration Mitza did have within Einstein's early work. There's a general consensus that she did contribute a great deal, but because her name's on nothing, we just don't know. So that's another thing. So it's still a really lovely book. I mean, physics and math is like my worst subject ever, but it was still really interesting for me to have a book that goes from the perspective of someone for whom that is, like, that's their passion. That's what they're very, very gifted at. Like, that was really unique for me. I have a deep appreciation for the people who can find a beauty in it. And I really liked that aspect of the book a lot. I really liked how Mitza approaches, like, the language of science, and how that's both her access to God and to Albert. And when she feels cut off from science, she just feels lost. And it's a recurring thing throughout the story. And when she's cut off from science, that's when she starts, like, you know, actually praying more and finding herself, like, trying to bring back that access. And when it's not really happening, you know, she's going through this very, very deep emotional turmoil, especially throughout the last half of the story. As a person of faith, I think that was even more deep and meaningful, just to watch her own personal struggle. We never really do find out what changed in Albert, why he changed, what happened. We don't get that closure, really. We don't understand why or how or when exactly the shift happened, apart from what Mitza suspects herself. But you as the audience, I mean, it's told solely from her perspective, so she doesn't get the closure, so you don't get the closure. You don't know what changed, you just know something did. I mean, again, it seems realistic. It's very, very sad. It's hard to read. It's weird to know why he stopped, like, acknowledging or crediting her, but then he would also advocate for Madame Curie, and it makes, you know, we experience that confusion and hurt and betrayal with her. I appreciated how her friendship with Helene remained strong throughout the book. They communicated through letters. They occasionally got to see each other, but I appreciated that at least she had that positive aspect, and her parents were very supportive of her, which was really awesome. At the end, Mitza recovering her strength and finally finding herself and her courage is a really glorious moment. I love that. I love the ending and her finding her strength and being like, okay, I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. I'm not sure how I'll provide for myself. I'm not sure how this is gonna work, but I'm gonna try. And it's a really good ending. It's a real good ending. I was happy with it. Alright, so that's pretty much everything. So I'm going to kind of speed through the rest of my makeup look, and we will come back at the end for the final look and thoughts. Okay, quick note. I am going to be trying to do something general relativity related. Like, there's like this famous image, I'll put it up here if I can figure out how to put it up here. It's related to the general relativity theory, and I'm going to try and draw it on my face. This may turn out horrible. We'll just go with it. The other thing was to try and do, like, something with the golden ratio. Somehow the wibbly lines of this seemed a little safer than trying to do something with the golden ratio. But we shall see. Oh, I'm gonna try. guys, this is the final look. It ended up way more conceptual than I thought. I'm not in love with it. I'm not mad at it. Once I added the stuff on the other eye, I felt a lot better about it. And I was trying to freehand it, and I mean, you just saw my struggle. It was not working. And so I added some bronze and I added some silver, and I'm just like, guys, this isn't working. And I was gonna add like triangles and try to do golden ratio stuff on the side. I'm like, I'm just gonna do tiered triangles because triangles are math. And then I'm like, okay, well, a lot of it is like Mitza like breaking throughout the story, and so I added some cracks because I was trying. It's a bit of a stretch, but bear with me here. So I added the cracks because she's kind of breaking, but there's not a lot of cracks, and like, I mean, she does eventually kind of put herself back together, but it's like the structure of her life that's like falling apart. And so, you know, structured triangles, but they're kind of open triangles because, you know, that, just bear with me here. It connects kind of. I feel like it works. Please. Okay, anyway, but then I did kind of a blotted lip, gentle rouging pearly finish to kind of attempt to emulate the Edwardian kind of makeup. I tried. It's not my best, but it's not my worst. Anyway, so about the book. I really loved it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought that it was really well done. I appreciated reading the author's thoughts at the end of the book because you could tell she put a ton of research into it. She read a lot of original letters between Mileva and Albert. She read as much as she could find on this person that's kind of lost to the shadows of history. I thought it was really wonderful that she decided to tell her story and kind of show her struggles and how she struggled to pull herself out of her circumstances. She just was like, I love science, I'm going to pursue it, and she hit struggle and grief after grief, and she still persevered. And even when she did have these moments where she was very broken, you saw how she kept putting one foot in front of the other, even when she wasn't sure where it was going to lead. And I just thought it was very beautifully written. I really appreciated this author's writing style, and just knowing how thoughtful she was about portraying both Albert and Mileva's life. Even though it's in a fictionalized form, it's still telling history, and I think it's very engaging. So I really enjoyed the story. I would definitely recommend it. I hope I did an okay job explaining it. It was a little different for me trying to figure out how to review a book that's fiction but also history, because I can't really give a lot of notes on, well, that seems unrealistic, because, I mean, it happened. Other than some of the things that you have to kind of speculate about, which, again, she, you know, tells you what she was kind of adding as far as speculation. Interesting to get a more human look at Albert Einstein. I definitely have a different viewpoint of him after reading the book than before, but I think that's a good thing. And, you know, he did good things in his life and he did bad things in his life, and this kind of highlighted a bit of both. And, you know, he's not just one-dimensional anymore. It's not just his scientific accomplishments. You're also seeing the personal side of him. And, you know, he had his own struggles and things, but you're viewing him through the lens of someone who loved him and then someone who kind of fell away from him. And it's very interesting and unique, and I think it's very good. Again, it does have some fairly hard to read, like gaslighting, emotional abuse. There's one instance of physical abuse. It's hard to read, but again, it's realistic and it's part of history, so it was very well told. So please, if you're into historical fiction, biofics, give it a read, and it's really cool to see this woman of science before it was cool. And yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up down below and consider subscribing to my channel to see more book looks and more book and beauty related content. If you have comments or suggestions for future book looks I should do, please comment down below. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you so much for joining me today. I love you all so much. Stay magic, keep reading, have a beautiful day. Bye!